So this is our time to chat together. And does anyone have any questions about the film or comments that you'd like to make?
We didn't put you to sleep, did we?
You know, one of the things that I found so beautiful about this film was, or something that touched me, was this idea of embracing what comes to you. It was a wonderful lesson about that, you know, because we're always looking for the reasons why, and how do you explain it, and, you know, how can you prove it, and da 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 da. But actually, when you rip all that away and you just embrace, there's such a beauty there, and this film really showed that so perfectly. So I took that from it, I really did.
Well, the story of the Bob lends itself to making a film. We've been talking about making it, the Bahá'ís have, for over 40 years, and we first broached the subject, but it's a little bit of a challenge because you can't show him. So when I suggested to Bob Hercules, our director, that we're going to make the film about the Bob, he said, that's great, and then I kind of told him we can't show our main character. He said, what? You know, but we figured it out. It took a while. No questions whatsoever? Someone's got to have a question.
There's one there.
Actually, I had a few questions that ran through my mind. And this is a question for you specifically.
Oh, they're going to bring you a microphone so then we can all hear your question. Thank you so much.
My understanding of the Baha'i faith is that all religions agree and it embraces all of the religions. So my curiosity is around what made you need to be a Baha'i first wait till the bar mitzvah was over to become a Baha'i?
Well,
if
from
the
my
Baha'i faith embraces.
So from my perspective, I didn't care at all. It was my wife who cared. My wife, who's Catholic, actually wanted them to have the bar mitzvah, and she said, well, you're Jewish, you have to be the Jewish one and shepherd it through. I said, it doesn't matter whether I'm... So I agree with you. I didn't think it mattered at all, and it turns out I ended up declaring a year before the bar mitzvah anyway, but I still went. I told my wife I wanted to have a very simple, humble affair, and so you're not from Chicago, so this won't mean anything, but she rented out the Shed Aquarium, and I paid for it, and I went and supported my children, and I would have done that whether I was a Baha'i or a Christian or a Jew or agnostic. It wouldn't have mattered. I love my children.
Thank you very much. I have one other question, which is, Tahereh was presented with the letter, and the Bob needed to write that final letter before he was executed. Where can we find those letters?
At the end of the film, you see Mount Carmel. You see the terraces going up Mount Carmel. I don't know if we actually see it. I have to go back and look at the end, but there's the Ark of the Covenant, which is the Baha'i administrative order. And one of the buildings is the Archives building, and that's a really unusual building because I forget how many stories it is. It's like 9 stories, 3 stories above ground and 6 underneath. It's mostly underneath the ground. So the answer is all the original, very valuable Baha'i writings are underneath, are really buried right in the center of the mountain. So they're very, very secure. They actually had to brace the mountain. They had to do a lot of work to brace the mountain and then build this building. And it's just an incredible architectural feat. So that's where it is. They're buried in the heart of Mount Carmel, in the mountain of God.
What did they say?
I don't know. The person, I wish I was Nader Saidi. Has anyone met Dr. Nader Saidi? He could actually tell you. But I would tell you that the essence of the Baha'i writings is the oneness of God, the oneness of religion, and the oneness of humanity. The Baha'i writings are really talking about how there's a singular reality that we all live in, and that instead of saying my version of reality is right, your version of the same reality is wrong, we should be studying that singular reality together and understanding that none of us has perfection in our understanding of it, and that we should really be forgetting everything we know and then investigating truth. That's essentially, if I had to sum up the Baha'i writings in a sentence, that's what I would say.
So are those specific writings revealed or kept hidden in these archives?
They are, so if you wanted to read the Baha'i writings, they are translated. So the the Baha'i writings, all the key Baha'i writings are online for free. There's the Kitab-i-Iqan, which is the Book of Certitude, which is amazing. That's it was mentioned in the film about progressive revelation. That really comes from the Kitab-i-Iqan, the Book of Certitude, written by Baha'u'llah. There's the Hidden Words, which I'm working on memorizing now, which is also written by Baha'u'llah. There's many, many books written by Baha'u'llah, written by the Bab, written by Abdul-Baha. Almost all of their key works are available for free online, and of course you can buy them as well.
Steve, I have a question. Since this process was really a collaboration between many faiths and many backgrounds, maybe you can shed light on what was that process like?
So obviously as the executive producer, I oversaw the process, but the way Baha'is work is we're very collaborative. And so Bob, the director, is not a Baha'i, and yet he was very respectful to faith, and he's really didn't know much about the faith, although he lives just a few blocks from the Baha'i temple. He really didn't know much about Baha'i faith, and he's come to have a great appreciation of the faith. Kayla, who was the producer in Spain where we did the reenactments, also not a Baha'i, most of the actors not Baha'is. So we all worked together, and actually it was remarkably smooth. We really didn't have a lot of arguments. There was a lot of difficult problems to solve. One of my favorite memories is in Israel, at the Shrine of the Bab with the terraces. We shot all the narration, the last thing we shot, and we had an Israeli crew, and we had a non-Baha'i director. The Israeli crew was not Baha'i. There were only a handful of Baha'is there. The actual narrator, she's a Baha'i. Yanni is a Baha'i, and Adam, who plays Mullah Hussein, is a Baha'i. But most of the actors, most of the people involved in all ways were not Baha'is. But we worked together, and the whole idea from a Baha'i perspective is that we don't worry about the labels. We're all serving God, and so we're serving God together. We can spend time fighting about our labels, or we can just, I always say, let's not worry who Jesus was, let's not worry who Muhammad was, because frankly, that's above my pay grade. I don't know. They're spiritually above me, as was Baha'u'llah. But let's just do what they told us to do, and they all clearly told us to love God and love each other. So if we just did that, we'd be in a lot better shape.
Hello, I'm back in the corner here.
Oh, okay.
I have a question. Are you going to carry forward this narrative form of presentation to other stories in the faith? Because there's so many, and they diverge and weave so beautifully.
We would love to make many more movies. Next week I've had the incredible privilege of going to Haifa, speaking of Haifa, and I'm meeting with my wife, God willing, with the House of Justice, a couple members, and they're going to give me some guidance. And until then, I don't know what I'm going to do. If they tell me to make the next movie in a closet with no sound, I'll do that. If they tell me never to make another movie, I'll do that. But we'll do what we can to serve the cause in any way we can. I'm actually going there to really consult on how to use the fortune we've been blessed with, my wife and I, to serve humanity, which is our prime purpose. To as Baha'is, our job. It doesn't. If movies are going to serve humanity, we'll make movies. We really enjoyed making this movie. Going forward, we'll see what we'll do. So, which subtitles? Like in English or Farsi or?
English for the people who have a hard of hearing and also deaf. It was very hard to get the part that there was no face.
We do have it subtitled, and if you wanted to get a copy of the movie, I'm sure someone could arrange that for you. It's on me if you need it, if you have that. Just whoever's here from the Baha'i community, we'll make sure you get a copy with the subtitles so you can see it on your own with the subtitles. But we do have that in several languages.
And if you can repeat the question so they can have some time.
I would be happy to do that. I'll repeat your question too.
Oh, there's a question. And you might just want to check and make sure that mic is on, actually.
Yeah, it's on, you just have to hold it close.
Yeah, there you
I'm very intrigued by what it was that you found in the Baha'i faith that led you on such a profound journey, because it seems that this has become a very central purpose in your life to share the beliefs and the meaning behind this. So I was wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing that moment. If your wife is now Baha'i also, what happened?
My wife is not Baha'i, my wife is Catholic. My children are Jewish. Oh yes, I'm sorry, I have to repeat the question. I said I was going to do it and I lied. By the way, Baha'is are not supposed to lie like I just did either. But the question is, I was Jewish, and tell us a little bit about my journey. So, is my wife now a Baha'i? The answer is not yet. She's Catholic, as a Baha'i would say, but she's got her own journey, and she's a wonderful philanthropist. We have a family foundation. She spends her time helping the poor and the needy, and she really does. She's very dedicated to doing that. And that is the true faith of any faith, of Christianity, of Judaism, of Baha'i. You're going to probably get the idea that I'm trying to do away with the labels. But my own personal journey, my mom asked me this. My mom said, you know what, I really like everything you're doing. I love this idea of the oneness of humankind. I love this idea, but why do you have to become Baha'i? Why not just stay Jewish and believe all these things, which she does. But I met Baha'u'llah in my heart and my soul, and that's really when I became a Baha'i. When I realized that to me that he was the manifestation of God, the messenger of God for our age, and I had to tell people that he came. That's my biggest thing. Hey, he's here. He wrote all these great things. Read them for yourselves and decide what you think for yourself. If I look, the idea of progressive revelation is extremely important to me. I heard it first over 30 years ago, and I just always loved it. I love the idea, instead of thinking that I'm a Jew and I'm right, and by the way, all you Christians are wrong, or the Christians are right, the Jews are wrong, or maybe the Muslims are right and the Christians and Jews are wrong. This doesn't make sense to me. The idea that there's a God who hates most of the people that he created doesn't make sense. And so when the Baha'is said everyone can go to heaven, I'm like, well, that makes sense. But it's more of an individual choice. If you're a Jew, be a good Jew.
So is progressive revelation and the oneness the overarching belief?
Yes, and if it's progressive revelation, what I am is...
Repeat, please.
So, I'm sorry, it's progressive revelation. Sorry, I'm really bad at repeating. Is progressive revelation the overarching thing? And yeah, to me it is. I mean, you can ask different Baha'is. People find the Baha'i faith many different ways. Some people are mystical. I'll tell you the story from London as soon as I'm done. I'll tell you a different way to find the faith. But my way was definitely logical and then mystical. It went from being logical to being incredibly mystical. And so I think there's two sides. There's your head and your heart. I found the faith in my head first, and then very unexpectedly I found it in my heart. And that changed my whole life. When I entered the shrine of Baha'u'llah for the first time, I was still Jewish. My wife had told me I couldn't declare yet until after the bar mitzvah. And when I walked into that shrine, I walked in one person, I walked out another. And I had several after effects. One was that I was teaching the faith nonstop. The second, I walked out of the shrine. I walked in, and his shrine is incredibly beautiful. And I started crying the whole time. I'm not much of a crier, but I cried the whole time. And I saw a vision of world peace. I knew that Baha'u'llah had brought it. I knew that it was here for us. I knew that I was in a war zone. I knew I wasn't worthy to be there. I knew so many things that made me cry. And when you're really feeling things in your heart, that's a big thing. I literally couldn't stop talking about the faith. I wanted to tell people, look, we have peace. It's right there. We don't have to fight anymore. We don't have to have war. And these are the lessons. Ask anyone. I'm fond of asking people, do you want world peace? And everyone says, yes, yes, yes. And I say, well, how? And then people get very quiet. And Baha'u'llah wrote the equivalent of 60 Christian Bibles, 100 Qurans, about how to get to world peace. And I believe this roadmap needs to be read by as many people as possible. And it has to do with breaking down these age-old barriers. And so when my mom asked me, why am I Baha'i? I'm here because, first of all, I believe in Baha'u'llah. So another way to say this, I'm just a Jew who believes in Baha'u'llah. I'm not a Jew. I don't disbelieve in what I believe. I believed in the Torah. I believed in the teachings of Moses. I still do. And now I also believe in the teachings of Jesus Christ. And I believe in the teachings of Muhammad. The big thing is I don't believe that they are contradictory to each other. And anyone I've ever talked to who studied them actually comes to that same conclusion, that they're mostly the same. It's the same stories, the same morals. And sometimes when somebody's left-handed and somebody's right-handed, or different name, in the case of sacrifice. Here's a great story, Abraham and Isaac. The Muslims think it's Ishmael. The Christians and the Jews think it's Isaac. Well, who's right? Well, they're both right. Because really, it doesn't matter what his name was. What's the story about? The story is about Abraham going to sacrifice his one and only son. And the point of the story is not which son he sacrifices, it's that he doesn't sacrifice his son. And why is that important? Because that represents the end of human sacrifice, which was quite common at the time. It doesn't matter what his son was named. It could have been Isaac, could have been Ishmael, it could have been Fred. It doesn't matter. What matters is this is a symbolic story about the end of human sacrifice. And so we fight over things that are relatively unimportant. And this, thank God we don't sacrifice our children anymore, because I wouldn't be here to talk to you. My father would have had plenty of reasons to sacrifice me. But we fight over these things, these outer forms of religion, Baha'u'llah says, and he says stop. And so for me as a Baha'i, I believe it's to teach people that really religion is one, humankind is one. All the teachings of Baha'u'llah, in my feeble way, I kind of just try to get people to open the door themselves and walk in. And one of the key things in the Baha'i faith is that this is a journey for you individually. It's not my journey. Your journey is yours, mine is mine. And we don't force our faith on anybody. We don't tell anyone you have to be a Baha'i. But we do tell people, we're allowed to tell people, we love our faith, we love Baha'u'llah. Look, this is, we look at this as a beautiful bag of gems. And every person I try to say, here's this bag of gems, you could have it too. And then they decide if they want it. And if they don't want it, it's okay. And if they do,
Expansion versus.
yes.
Jew and now I'm not, now I'm Baha'i.
Yes.
I'm a Jew and a.
Yes. And I have a friend who's Christian who taught me the Christian faith, and if he ever accepted Baha'u'llah, he would be a wonderful Christian, which he is, who also loves Baha'u'llah. And that's all it is. You're welcome. Oh, I want to tell you about the Turkish man. So another way to find the faith. I was in London last week, and there was I was at the gravesite of Shoghi Effendi, who's known as the guardian of the Baha'i faith, the last singular person to lead the Baha'i faith. He was the great-grandson of Baha'u'llah, and he died in London in 1957. His gravesite is there, and it's a pilgrimage spot for Baha'is from all over the world. So when I was there, the caretaker told me a story. There was a gentleman from Turkey, and he goes from London to Turkey for a family reunion, and while they're there, they hear about this fortune teller who's known for her accuracy, and they, at a lark, kind of go to where they're kind of joking. It's a fortune teller after all. We know these things aren't real. And so he goes there, and the first thing she tells him is that he's from an island. He doesn't live there, he lives on an island. He's thinking, well, no, I live on London. Oh, in London, oh, that's an island. So he gets that, and she tells him a few other things, and then she says, there's a temple near where you live, where people come from all over the world to pray in their own languages. He goes back to London, he's very intrigued, and he spends the next 18 months going to churches, to mosques, to temples, talking to rabbis, priests, imams, asking them, do you know where this place is? And nobody knows where the place is. And he's about ready to give up, and 18 months go by, and he's still looking. And finally he's getting tired, and he goes to a party at his daughter's place. And there's a couple Baha'is there, and he says, do you have a temple in London? They say no. Cross another one off the list. And he tells them what he's looking for, and they say, oh, well, wait, maybe the gravesite of Shoghi Effendi. So he goes there. He instantly becomes a Baha'i. He walks in, just like I did. He had a metaphysical, mystical experience. He instantly became a Baha'i. And his whole family is now Baha'is. And I posted this on Facebook last week, and his daughter said, that's my dad's story. So it's a real story.
Yes. Now I have a question. How do you apply the belief of unity, world peace, humanity,
Excuse me.
no sacrifice with the today's complex world situation?
So how do we apply these, I'm getting better now. How do we apply these things about unity and world peace to the complex situation we have today? Well, first of all, the situation, I look at all of life like a mathematical equation. So if you have 2 on one side, you have 2 on the other side. 2 plus 2 equals 4. The problem is we have mistaken ideas on one side, and the complexity has to do with all the mistaken ideas. So it's like a mathematical equation, and now we have all these misunderstandings, which have made it complex, and the other side, we have all these misunderstandings. If we take the input, which is now we think that we have all these divisions, that I am different because look at the two of us, okay? You notice our skin color is different. That's true. But are we less human? Is he less human? Am I less human? No. By all means, no. Abdul-Baha would have referred to all of us as flowers in the garden. Our skin colors are beautiful flowers, and we should each shine as the flower we are. You're a woman, I'm a man. Does that make you different? Does that make you better or worse? Not according to Baha'u'llah. But yet, we still have people who think that sexism should reign, that racism should still exist, that nationalism should still exist. My wife is Honduranian. She lived in Honduras till she was 2, she was born there. And we support refugees, and actually, if anyone's heard of the Tahrir Justice Center, we support them, and they help Honduranian refugees, a wonderful Baha'i named Layli Miller who was in the film. And anyway, I think it's criminal that, you can put me on tape as saying this, I think it's criminal that we take young girls who are 10 years old and put them in jail when they're fleeing a war zone. You don't take your 10-year-old daughter and send her to another country. And I can't tell you what, because I've heard what these young girls go through, just as worse than anything you can imagine. We should not be putting them in jail. We should be treating them as human beings. Everyone should be treated as human. I'm not talking about changing our immigration policy and saying everyone can come in. I'm saying we should treat people humanely. And so these ideas that we're different from each other, that we're divided, are the problem, and they're the complexity. So I'll give you an example. Israel. Of course, we can't have peace in Israel. Everyone says, well, I love to ask people, can we have peace in the Middle East? And they're like, well, that's a little above my pay grade. That's a little bit, we're never going to get that. Because there's Jews and there's Arabs, and they're never going to be able to love each other because, well, you know they're different races. Except anyone who's been to Israel can't tell them apart. I can't, and I was raised Jewish. I literally can't, because they look alike, because they're brothers and sisters, so forget the race thing. Even if there was different races, which we know scientifically, it's not that we are the same race. All of us are the human race. Now, forget about, I'm not saying that he's going to get treated equally as I am. We know, as Americans, that's not the case, and we have to fight racism. It exists, but we are, in fact, the same race. And the Jews and Arabs are really the same race. I mean, really the same, look-alike, you know? You can't even tell them apart. So that's not the problem. It must be religion then. But wait a second, we look at the same God. The Muslim God and the Christian God that the Arabs watch and worship is the same as the Jewish God. So wait a second, did that God ever tell us to hate each other? I don't think so. And so we start taking these assumptions that the Jews and the Arabs have to fight for that land because the Jews own the land, or the Arabs own the land, and the Palestinians. Nobody owns the land. Abdul-Baha said that land is only our grave. He says we die there. We live this short time on life, and then we can't take our wealth with us. We don't take our possessions with us. Why are we fighting over? He says it's so sad that the highest thing on earth, which is us, we are at our best, the highest thing on earth, fight for the lowest thing, the dirt. And so that's what's happening in Israel. If we listen to what Abdul-Baha and Baha'u'llah and the Bab taught, the oneness of humankind, all of these complexities go away. I just took the complexities away from one of the more complex problems. How do you solve peace in the Middle East? You look at reality as it is, the true oneness of humankind. And then we are brothers and sisters and we help each other. By the way, on the ground, because I do work there are a lot of people who agree with me. A lot of people agree that it's one.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. And one of the things that struck me in the film, and we might not get to the dehumanization of, or we might not get to the reality of the oneness of humanity until something called the doctrine of discovery is revoked. And what struck me in the film was the similarities between what happened with the Bahá'ís and the soldiers when they were tricked, and the indigenous peoples' treaties, and the tricking that happened between the colonists. By the way, the colonization, the root of that is colon, and the indigenous peoples. So that struck me as extremely similar.
Well, the Baha'i faith, okay, so the question is, what she points out is the similarities between indigenous peoples and what happened to the Bahá'ís where they're tricked. And indigenous peoples are talked about quite a bit, believe it or not, in the Baha'i writing. So here, from people who are Persian, halfway across the world, they're talking about the indigenous people. in America and in all parts of the world, that the indigenous people are very important and very spiritual. And so all of us are one. And so the indigenous people are not more important than anyone else. They're also not less important than anyone else. We are one. And so all people must be treated with love and respect and honor. And in this country, we've not done a good job of doing that with our indigenous people.
Are there any other questions? Oh yes, there's one.
How does the Baha'i faith, how does the Baha'i faith address justice in this unjust world?
O some spirit, the best beloved of all things in my sight is justice. Turn not away therefrom if thou desirest me, and neglect it not, that I may confide in thee. By its aid thou shalt see with thine own eyes, and not through the eyes of others, and shalt know of thine own knowledge, and not through the knowledge of thy neighbor. Ponder this in thy heart, how it behooveth thee to be. Verily, justice is my gift to thee, and a sign of my loving kindness. Set it then before thine eyes. So that's from Baha'u'llah. That's one of the hidden words. And so he's saying, justice is the best beloved of all things in my sight. What's very interesting about that is he goes on to say that it's about seeing with your own eyes. Oh, by the way, I didn't repeat. So he's talking about justice, she's talking about justice in an unjust world. So it's about seeing with your own eyes, knowing of your own knowledge. So each of us, this is really a big thing in the Baha'i faith. We have to search for truth. We have an unjust world because we haven't searched for truth. The truth of our oneness, the truth of all of our oneness, is justice. It doesn't mean that everyone's going to get an equal portion at the dinner plate, but it means everyone's going to get dinner. Justice means that we should love each other. Justice means we should serve each other. Justice means we should help those who need our help. If I have 2 portions, I should be able to give 1 to someone else. I don't need to have 2 portions. We should all love each other, help each other. We should be helping, giving, serving humanity. That's just. What's not just is inequity, and I'm actually a part of this, which is why I'm trying to be a philanthropist. You know, it's not the incredible, and Baha'u'llah says this, the incredible, he says that wealth can be a barrier to God for a wealthy person, and that unless you're very careful, you can really hurt yourself by being wealthy. He actually warns the wealthy more than the impoverished. The great gap between wealth and poverty is a problem in this country. There's other forms of injustice. I mentioned racism. He says racism, actually it's in the Baha'i writings. Racism is the single worst problem in this country, and it needs to be addressed. And it's said over and over again in the Baha'i writings. For over 100 years, the Baha'i writings have been saying, get rid of racism in this country, and we need to, first and foremost. Sexism is bad, but in this country, number 1 is racism. So this is a form of injustice. All forms of injustice have to do with inequity, that one person has less than an equal chance than the other person, and that should never be. We should all be, you know, some of us will be taller, some of us will be shorter, some of us will be faster and slower, some of us are smarter and dumber, but we should never, ever be given less than an equal chance because we're a woman or because we're darker in skin or from another country or lighter in skin. We should always have an equal chance, and we should be loving and kind to each other. And anything but that is injustice. But I would say injustice will be wiped out when we turn towards God. I'm not a secular humanist. I believe that God has the answers. I don't think we're that smart.
Are there any more questions or comments? Yes.
I don't have a question. I just want to tell you that this movie was so beautiful. It moved me to tears.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. The movie moved her to tears, and I just said thank you.
Thank you. It has been a pleasure. Oh, we have one more question?
I hate to say this, but I was really tired when I was watching the film, and I think I dozed off, and I didn't catch who the woman was who revealed her face. Was that the wife of the Bab, or was that a believer? And can you kind of follow up on her story and women in Baha'i?
Okay, yes. So the question is, who was that woman who removed the veil? Was she the wife of the Bab? And she was not. She was Tahareh. Now Tahareh was one of his 18 disciples. She was the last surviving, actually, disciple in 1852. In 1848, she was, first of all, she was the only one not to meet the Bab. She was so spiritual that she actually became a disciple without ever meeting the Bab himself. She, in 1848, pulled off her veil. Now, in the Bible, in both the Old and New Testament, we talk about the trumpet blast. Well, Tahirih was that trumpet blast. She herself was the trumpet. She announces this new age, very publicly in 1848, pulls off her veil. Nothing could be more stunning than that. And she says this is a new age for all humanity, and one of the new rules is women's rights. So right from the very, very start, when it was first publicly revealed, the equality of women was in the forefront of the Baha'i faith. Now, before you think that I'm saying that other faiths aren't any good, that's not true at all. Progressive revelation means that this is a single revelation from a single God. And so every version has elevated women, and this is just the next phase from Islam, which was the next phase from Christianity. They all elevated women. And this is finally elevating women to true equality. It's just elevating them a little bit more. And so what Baha'u'llah says, he says that women and men are wings of a bird. And if one wing is a little weaker than the other wing, that stronger wing, that's us, must help the weaker wing, which doesn't have all the rights, not weaker physically, but weaker wing, doesn't have the rights until both wings can fly equally and the bird of humanity can fly. So from the very beginning of the Baha'i faith, women have been thought of as equal, and it's a primary point in the Baha'i faith. And we don't think this is diametrically opposed to the previous faiths. It's just like I said, the conclusion of where they were pointing anyway.
Was she executed?
She was executed in 1852, I should have mentioned this, and before she died, she put on her wedding dress. She looked him in the eye and she said, "You can kill me as soon as you like, but you cannot stop the emancipation of women." And if you look at the papers today, women are fighting, and men, by the way, for those men here, we should be fighting side by side for our mothers, our sisters, our daughters, our friends. For all of humanity, we should be fighting for freedom and emancipation, equality, rights.
Well, thank you all very, very much. You know, I wanted to say one more thing that listening to you is so engrossing, really. I loved every moment of it. And I love the way you talk about diversity in terms of the garden and the flowers.
That's Abdul Baha, I have to say.
Well, I think that is a message. We need that message so desperately right now. And to think of ourselves differently, but yet in unison. I mean, that's the real message that we're missing in a way. And so anyway, I love that idea. So thank you for sharing it, and thank all of you.
Well, I'll just say this quote about flowers of a garden comes from 1912 when Abdul Baha visited America. He spoke at the 4th annual NAACP. He was their keynote speaker. Here's a guy from Persia who barely speaks English, and he's the keynote speaker. He's been a prisoner, by the way, for 55 years. He's just come out a few years earlier. And he speaks at the NAACP about all of us being flowers of a garden. He says, well, flowers don't fight and animals don't fight. Why would humans fight? We're the higher species. And he actually turned down Congress, who wanted him to speak that night about peace, and he goes to the NAACP instead. He did several things. One other thing he did while he was on that trip is he went to Washington, D.C. And Washington, D.C., I'm embarrassed to say, was totally segregated, including among the Baha'is, which doesn't exactly accord with the Baha'i faith. And so Abdul Baha had a way of saying things. And what he did is he went to a very fancy luncheon at a woman, I think her name was Parsons, and he went to a very fancy whites-only luncheon, and he left the seat of honor right next to him empty, and Louis Gregory, who was a very famous African-American Baha'i, he had been there earlier. He invited Louis Gregory to stay for lunch, and he had him sit at the seat of honor to his right. And that act single-handedly made the Baha'is the first integrated group in Washington, D.C. in 1912.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. I've just had an enjoyable day. It's been marvelous. So, thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for coming to my class.
Really, on behalf of the Baha'i community, I want to again shed light on this magnificent gift that we have been given, this instancy of friendship and love through unity of vision. We called upon dear Thomas literally days ago, and within a matter of minutes, he agreed with radiance, I have to say. And with Steve, as he said 2 days ago, he was in London and he's again on the go. And for him to again accept to come is another, I think, manifestation that in this unity of approach towards the oneness and progress, we will all show up to do what we have to do. And you have showed up, and we're very grateful. And we want to extend that invitation to you, to the Bahá'í Center, which is at the corner of East Avenue in Oxford, for continuation of this conversation, not only this afternoon, but in upcoming events. Please allow us to have more and more of these conversations. Only and only if we have these face-to-face can we bridge the differences in the way that will be sustained. And so thank you very much. Thank you to both of you, orbs of light that have come and graced us.
Wait, I forgot to mention that he's also the executive producer of that marvelous film, Maya Angelou, I may get it wrong, Maya Angelou.
And Still I Rise.
Still I Rise. That wonderful documentary film